The mining station orbited the gas giant Kepler 442c like a metal tick on a sleeping beast. Commander Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the observation deck's reinforced glass, watching the swirling orange and amber storms below. 3 years she'd been stationed here, overseeing the extraction operations that kept the Terran colonial authorities' war machine fed with rare metals. 3 years of watching alien ships pass by in the distance, never approaching, never threatening. That changed when the distress beacon started screaming. "Commander, we're picking up an emergency signal," Lieutenant Rodriguez called from the communications station. "It's strange. The pattern doesn't match any known protocols." Sarah turned from the window, her boots clicking against the metal deck plating. The command center buzzed with activity as her crew worked to isolate the signal. Banks of monitors showed mining schedules, ore processing rates, and security feeds from the automated extraction platforms scattered across the gas giant's upper atmosphere. "Can you clean it up?" she asked, moving to stand behind Rodriguez. His fingers danced across the holographic interface. "Working on it. The signal's weak, heavily distorted. It's coming from Sector 7 near the storm wall." Sarah's jaw tightened. Sector 7 was marked as a no-fly zone. The electromagnetic interference from the massive storm system made navigation impossible for most ships. Only the heavily shielded mining platforms could operate there, and even they had to be recalled when the storms intensified. "There," Rodriguez said as the static cleared. What emerged made everyone in the command center fall silent. It wasn't a mechanical distress beacon. It was a voice. Multiple voices, actually, high-pitched, desperate, speaking in a language none of them recognized. But underneath the alien words, the tone was unmistakable. Fear, pain, children crying. "My God," whispered Dr. Amanda Price, the station's xenobiologist. She'd been studying the few alien artifacts they'd discovered in the asteroid fields, trying to piece together clues about the species that had once inhabited this system. "Those sound like juveniles, young ones." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Rodriguez, triangulate that signal. I want exact coordinates." "Already on it, Commander. Signals coming from bearing 27 Mark IV, approximately 800 kilometers into the storm wall." "That's impossible," said Chief Engineer Barnes, looking up from his console. "Nothing survives in there. The electromagnetic pulses alone would fry any known ship design." The crying continued, a haunting melody of desperation that seemed to echo through the command center. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering another time, another place. Her younger sister Emma, calling for help when the apartment building had caught fire. Sarah had been 12, Emma only 6. She'd carried her sister down 4 flights of stairs through smoke and flames, never letting go, never stopping. She'd sworn that day she'd never ignore a cry for help again. "Barnes, prep Shuttle 7 for emergency launch," she ordered. The engineer's face went pale. "Commander, that's suicide. The storm wall will tear apart anything we send in there, the radiation alone." "Prep the shuttle," Sarah repeated, her voice carrying the iron that had gotten her through 17 years of military service. "Full atmospheric shielding, emergency medical supplies, and every piece of survival gear we have." "Sarah," Dr. Price stepped forward, using her first name in the way only old friends could. They'd served together on 3 previous assignments, had saved each other's lives more times than either cared to count. "Even if we could reach them, we don't know what we're dealing with. Unknown alien species, hostile environment, no backup within 3 light years." "I know exactly what we're dealing with," Sarah said, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. "Children in danger, that's all I need to know." The distress calls continued as the crew prepared for what everyone believed was a suicide mission. Sarah suited up in the shuttle bay, running through pre-flight checks with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The modified atmospheric shuttle was built for mining operations, designed to handle the turbulent upper atmosphere of gas giants. But even the engineers who designed it had never intended for it to penetrate a storm wall. "Final systems check complete," she announced over the comm. "All stations report ready." "Commander," came Barnes' voice, tight with worry. "Long-range sensors are picking up debris scattered throughout Sector 7. Metal fragments, organic compounds. Something big was destroyed in there." Sarah felt her hands tighten on the controls. "How big?" "Initial estimates suggest a vessel approximately 2 kilometers in length. Definitely not human design. The debris pattern indicates it broke apart under extreme stress, probably from the storm activity. 2 kilometers, that was larger than most Terran battleships, and if there were survivors. Launch in 30 seconds, Sarah announced. She'd handpicked her crew for this mission, Dr. Price for her xenobiology expertise, Sergeant Williams for security, and Corpsman Martinez for medical support. 4 people against an alien storm system and whatever dangers waited inside. The shuttle bay doors opened, revealing the swirling maelstrom of the gas giant below. Orange lightning flickered between massive cloud formations, each bolt carrying enough energy to power a small city. The storm wall itself was a towering edifice of atmospheric violence, reaching up from the planet's surface like a cosmic mountain range. "Shuttle 7, you are cleared for launch," Rodriguez's voice crackled through the comm. "Good hunting, Commander." Sarah engaged the engines and felt the familiar push of acceleration as they left the mining station behind. The shuttle's sensors immediately began registering increased electromagnetic interference as they approached the storm wall's outer edge. "Beginning penetration sequence," she announced. "Everyone strap in tight." The first turbulence hit them like a physical blow. The shuttle bucked and rolled as competing wind currents seized control. Sarah fought the stick, using every trick she'd learned flying atmospheric missions on hostile worlds. The hull groaned under the stress, metal components flexing beyond their design specifications. "Hull integrity holding at 87%, reported Martinez, monitoring the engineering station. "Radiation shielding is taking a beating, though." Lightning arced across their flight path, close enough to paint the shuttle's interior in stark white relief. The electromagnetic pulse that followed sent several systems into temporary failure before the hardened circuits came back online. "There," Dr. Price called out, pointing at her scanner display. "I'm reading metallic debris bearing 30 Mark II. Large concentrations of refined alloys, definitely artificial." Sarah banked toward the coordinates, fighting through wind shears that would have shredded a less robust aircraft. Through the swirling clouds, shapes began to emerge. Twisted metal beams, hull plates torn like paper, sections of what might have once been engines or weapon systems. And then she saw it. A piece of the alien ship's hull, perhaps 50 meters long, had somehow become lodged between 2 massive cloud formations. The electromagnetic fields were actually holding it in place, creating a pocket of relative stability in the chaos. But it was what was attached to that hull section that made Sarah's breath catch. A smaller craft, maybe 30 meters in length, was docked to the larger piece. Its design was unlike anything in Terran databases, all flowing curves and organic shapes, as if it had been grown rather than built. But what captured her attention was the steady pulse of light coming from its hull. Emergency lighting. Someone was alive in there. "I'm reading multiple life signs," Dr. Price confirmed, her voice filled with excitement and worry. "At least a dozen, possibly more, but the readings are strange. The biological patterns don't match anything in our xenological databases." The distress calls were stronger now, coming directly from the smaller craft. Sarah could hear individual voices, some deeper, some heartbreakingly high and young. A family, perhaps, or a group of refugees who'd escaped the larger ship's destruction. "Setting down on the hull section," Sarah announced. "The electromagnetic interference should provide some shielding while we make contact." Landing was like trying to thread a needle during an earthquake. The hull section bucked and twisted as electromagnetic currents pushed against it, but Sarah managed to set the shuttle down with only minor scrapes. Through the viewports, they could see the alien craft up close. It was beautiful in a strange way. The hull seemed to shift color in the lightning flashes, sometimes appearing deep purple, sometimes silver. Organic-looking protrusions that might have been sensors or weapons dotted its surface. And near what appeared to be an airlock, symbols glowed with soft bioluminescence. "Atmospheric readings show the hull section is maintaining some kind of environment," Dr. Price reported. "Thin, but breathable for short periods if we wear masks." They suited up and crossed to the alien craft on foot, using magnetic clamps to maintain their grip on the unstable surface. The airlock was clearly designed for beings smaller than humans. Sarah had to crouch to examine the entry mechanism. "The symbols are definitely a written language," Dr. Price observed, running her scanner over the glowing marks. "But there's something else. These biosignatures, the neural activity patterns. I think we're dealing with a telepathic species." Before Sarah could respond, the airlock suddenly cycled open. A blast of warm, humid air rushed out, carrying scents of ozone and something else, something that reminded her of a forest after rain. A figure appeared in the doorway, and Sarah had to fight not to step backward. It stood roughly 4 feet tall, with fur that shifted from deep blue to silver depending on the angle of view. Its face was elongated, almost canine, with large eyes that held unmistakable intelligence. It wore what appeared to be some kind of environmental suit, though it was clearly designed for a different atmospheric composition than what humans required. But what struck Sarah most was the expression on its face. Fear, yes, but also hope. And when it spoke, using that same language they'd heard in the distress calls, she didn't need a translator to understand the meaning. "Help us!" The alien gestured urgently back into its ship, and Sarah could hear more voices now, frightened young voices. Without hesitation, she followed it inside. The interior was a marvel of organic engineering. The walls seemed to pulse with their own life, providing light and warmth. But it was clear the ship was dying. Sections of the corridor were dark, and she could see areas where the hull had been breached and hastily sealed. They emerged into what appeared to be the main living area, and Sarah's heart nearly stopped. There were 11 of them, all clearly juveniles, ranging from what appeared to be toddlers to adolescents. They huddled together in the center of the room, their large eyes reflecting fear and exhaustion. Several showed signs of injury, burns, cuts, one with what looked like a broken limb. The adult who had led them inside spoke rapidly to the others. Sarah caught fragments that her translation software was beginning to parse, words that seemed to mean humans, help, and safe. Dr. Price was already scanning them with her medical equipment. "Sarah, these readings, they're incredible. Their neural patterns show signs of psychic bonding, probably family groups. But more than that, they're partially telepathic. I think they can sense our intentions." As if to confirm her words, one of the smaller cubs, because that's what they were, Sarah realized, cubs like wolf or bear young, approached her hesitantly. It looked up at her with eyes that seemed far too old for its apparent age, and she felt something brush against her mind. Not invasive, just a gentle touch, like a question. "Are you here to hurt us?" The thought seemed to form in her own mind, but she knew it wasn't hers. Without thinking, she knelt down to the cub's level and tried to project back the same feeling she would have toward any frightened child. "I'm here to help, you're safe now." The cub's ears perked up. They had mobile ears, she noted absently, and it made a sound that was unmistakably relieved. It turned and spoke to the others in their own language, and Sarah felt the emotional atmosphere in the room shift from fear to tentative hope. "Commander," Sergeant Williams called from the airlock, "we've got problems. The storm's intensifying and this hull section is starting to break apart. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it fast." Sarah looked around the crowded space, mentally calculating. 11 cubs, 1 adult, plus her crew of 4. Their shuttle was rated for 6 passengers maximum. "We'll have to make multiple trips," she decided. "Dr. Price, can you communicate with them? Find out if there are any others, any immediate medical emergencies." Dr. Price nodded and approached the adult alien, holding up her scanner and pointing to the cubs. The creature seemed to understand immediately and began what appeared to be a medical assessment, pointing out which cubs were injured and how severely. Meanwhile, Sarah contacted the mining station. "Rodriguez, I need you to prep the emergency medical bay and clear docking bay too. We're bringing back survivors." "Understood, Commander. How many are we talking about?" 12 aliens, mixed ages, at least half of them juveniles. There was a pause. "Say again, Commander, did you say aliens?" "You heard correctly. Prep for quarantine procedures, but assume they're refugees, not hostiles. And Rodriguez, get me a direct line to Colonial Command. They need to know about this immediately." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. They managed to evacuate the most seriously injured cubs first, along with the adult who seemed to be their caretaker. Sarah had to admire the alien's composure. Despite obvious exhaustion and stress, it kept the cubs calm and organized during the transfer. On the second trip, as they were loading the remaining cubs into the shuttle, disaster struck. A massive electromagnetic pulse swept through the storm wall, stronger than anything they'd encountered. The hull section they were standing on suddenly lurched, its magnetic anchoring to the larger debris failing. Sarah watched in horror as a section of the alien ship tore away, taking their makeshift landing pad with it. She was just getting the last 2 cubs secured when the shuttle's hull was struck by a piece of flying debris. The impact sent her flying across the cabin, and she felt something in her ribs crack as she hit the bulkhead. But worse than the pain was what she saw through the viewport. One of the cubs, a small one with silver fur that couldn't have been more than a few years old, had been thrown clear when the debris hit. It was falling toward the storm wall below, its small form tumbling helplessly through the chaotic winds. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed an emergency jetpack and dove through the shuttle's rear hatch. The winds seized her immediately, threatening to tear her apart. But she'd done EVA rescues before in asteroid fields and damaged ships. This was just another environment, just another challenge. She triggered the jetpack's maximum burn, angling toward the falling cub. The little alien was conscious but clearly terrified, its limbs flailing as it tried to find something to grab onto. Sarah could feel its terror through that strange mental connection, a wordless cry for help that cut through her like a blade. She reached it just as they both began to fall toward the energy barrier that marked the storm wall's inner boundary. Sarah wrapped her arms around the small form, feeling its heart racing against her chest. It looked up at her with those large, intelligent eyes, and she felt it trying to say something. "Thank you." "You're safe now," Sarah projected back, hoping the thought would carry through whatever telepathic link they shared. "I won't let go." But even as she said it, she realized they were both falling too fast. The jetpack wasn't designed for a rescue at this altitude, and the storm's interference was playing havoc with its guidance systems. They were going to hit the energy barrier, and at this speed. Sarah made a decision that went against every survival instinct she had. She twisted her body so that she would hit first, using herself as a cushion for the cub. If the impact killed her, at least the little one might survive. They struck the barrier with tremendous force, energy crackling around them like liquid lightning. Sarah felt every bone in her body jar from the impact, felt the environmental suit's life support systems fail one by one. But somehow, impossibly, they didn't die. The energy barrier wasn't solid. It was more like a membrane, and they punched through it into the calm space beyond. Sarah found herself falling through clear air toward what appeared to be a hidden cavity within the storm wall itself. And as she fell, clutching the alien cub to her chest, she heard it speak for the first time in words she could understand. Its translator must have finally synced with her suit systems, because its voice came through clear and heartbreakingly young. "Remember every one of their faces," it whispered, and Sarah realized it wasn't talking about her crew. It was talking about the ones who had destroyed its ship, the ones who had killed its family, the ones who had forced it and the other survivors to flee into this storm. As they tumbled toward the hidden sanctuary below, Sarah felt a cold rage building in her chest. Someone had attacked children. Someone had destroyed a family and left them to die in the storm. And as sure as her name was Sarah Chen, she was going to find out who. Sarah woke up to the sound of running water and the smell of growing things. For a moment, she thought she was back on Earth, maybe camping with her father in the Oregon wilderness. Then the memories came flooding back, the alien ship, the storm, the falling cub. She sat up quickly, ignoring the sharp pain in her ribs, and looked around. They were in some kind of cavern, but not a natural one. The walls curved upward in perfect arcs, covered with what appeared to be some kind of living material that glowed with soft bioluminescence. A stream of clear water ran along one wall, disappearing into channels that fed a series of terraced gardens. The cub was sitting nearby, watching her with those large, intelligent eyes. Now that she could see it clearly in the gentle light, Sarah was struck by how much it resembled a young wolf, if wolves had opposable thumbs and wore environmental suits. Its fur was a beautiful silver blue that seemed to shift with its emotions, and its ears twitched expressively as it monitored its surroundings. "You saved me," the cub said, its voice coming through her suit's translation system. The AI had apparently had time to process the language patterns. "Why?" Sarah slowly got to her feet, testing her injured ribs. Nothing seemed to be broken, just badly bruised. "Because you needed help, that's what humans do." The cub's ears flicked in what might have been surprise. "But I am not human, my people were, enemies of many. The others always say we take too much, want too much." "The others?" Before the cub could answer, Sarah's communication system crackled to life. "Commander Chen, please respond. Sarah, are you alive down there?" Dr. Price's voice was tight with worry. Sarah activated her transmitter. I'm alive, Amanda. The cub is safe. We're in some kind of artificial structure below the storm wall. Thank God, we've been trying to reach you for 6 hours. Your life signs dropped off our sensors when you went through that energy barrier. 6 hours? Sarah checked her suit's chronometer and saw that Price was right. It felt like she'd only been unconscious for minutes. The other survivors? She asked. Safe on the mining station. The adult, his name is Keeper Voss, has been very helpful. But Sarah, you need to know something. We've been monitoring long-range communications. There are ships coming, military vessels, and they're not human. Sarah felt the cub tense beside her. Its fur literally darkened from silver to a deep blue-black, and she could sense waves of fear coming from it through their telepathic connection. How long do we have? Sarah asked. Maybe 2 hours before they reach this system. Voss says they're hegemony hunters. They've been tracking his ship for weeks. Hegemony? Sarah looked down at the cub. Who are they? The little alien's ears had flattened against its head. The galactic hegemony controls this sector. They say we are thieves, that we steal from their mining operations, but we only take what we need to survive. Our home world. Its voice trailed off. What happened to your home world? Sarah asked gently. Gone. The hegemony needed the rare minerals in our planet's core. They gave us 3 days to evacuate. Most of our people made it to the colony ships, but some of us were left behind. The cubs like me, the old ones who couldn't travel, the sick ones. Sarah felt that cold rage building again. They strip-mined your entire planet. With us still on it, the cub confirmed. Keeper Voss and 11 of us escaped in a research vessel. We've been running ever since. Sarah's communication system buzzed again. Commander, this is Chief Barnes. You need to see what we found in the alien ship's databases. These hegemony forces, they're not here for mining rights. What do you mean? According to the ship's logs, they're here for what they call a final harvest. They've tracked the survivors to our system, and they plan to eliminate any witnesses to what happened on the home world. Witnesses to genocide? Sarah said quietly, and the cub nodded. That's why I must remember their faces, it said. Keeper Voss made us all memorize the commanders who destroyed our world. Someday, when we are old enough, we must find justice. Sarah knelt down so she was at the cub's eye level. What's your name? I am called Swiftpoint Starlight, but the human sounds are hard for your mouth. Keeper Voss says you may call me Starlight. Well, Starlight, I don't think you'll have to wait until you're old enough for justice. We're going to stop them here. The cub's ears perked up. But your people, they are not warriors like the hegemony, and there are only a few of you. Sarah smiled grimly. You'd be surprised what humans can do when someone threatens children. She activated her comm again. Amanda, I need you to download everything from the alien databases, ship specifications, hegemony military protocols, anything that might help, and get me a tactical assessment of the incoming fleet. Already working on it. But Sarah, the hegemony ships outgun us by a factor of 50 to 1. Our mining station has defensive shields, but they're designed to stop asteroids, not military-grade weapons. Sarah looked around the hidden cavern, her tactical mind already working on the problem. What is this place, Starlight? An old refuge, the cub explained. Built by the first people to mine this gas giant long before the hegemony claimed this sector. They hid it within the storm wall to protect their operations from pirates. Keeper Voss found the activation codes in our ship's historical databases. Does it have any defensive systems? Starlight's ears twitched, the equivalent of a human shrug. Unknown. It has been abandoned for many cycles, but the power systems still function, and there are large spaces that might once have held equipment. Sarah activated her suit's scanning systems and began mapping the structure. What she found made her heart race with possibilities. The refuge was huge, nearly a kilometer in diameter, with multiple levels carved into what appeared to be a stable pocket within the storm wall's eye. More importantly, her scans were detecting massive energy conduits and what looked like weapon emplacements, though they appeared to be powered down. Amanda, I'm sending you structural scans of this place. Get Barnes and his team to analyze them. If this is what I think it is, we might have a chance. Over the next hour, as Sarah and Starlight explored the refuge, her crew worked frantically on the mining station above. The picture that emerged was both encouraging and terrifying. The refuge was indeed an ancient military installation, built by a species that had once controlled this sector before the hegemony's rise to power. Its defensive systems were offline but potentially repairable. More importantly, its position within the storm wall made it nearly impossible to detect or attack directly. But the incoming hegemony fleet was formidable. 7 heavy cruisers and a command carrier plus support vessels. Against that, Sarah had 1 mining station with minimal defenses, a handful of maintenance shuttles, and 37 human civilians. "Commander," Rodriguez's voice came through the comm. "We've established communications with the hegemony fleet. They're demanding we surrender the alien survivors for processing." "What did you tell them?" "That I needed to speak with the senior commander first. Bought us maybe 30 minutes. Sarah was about to respond when Starlight suddenly grabbed her arm, its claws extending slightly in alarm. "Commander Sarah, something comes." Sarah's scanners picked up multiple contacts moving through the cavern system toward their position. But these weren't human life signs or even similar to the aliens from the ship. "Keeper Voss to Commander Chen," came a transmission on the alien frequency. "Please respond. I must warn you about the refuge." Sarah activated the channel. "I'm here, Keeper Voss, what's wrong?" "The historical records I found, they were incomplete. The refuge was not abandoned by choice. Something drove the original builders away, something that still lives in the deeper levels." As if summoned by his words, the first creature emerged from a side passage 50 meters away. Sarah's first thought was that it looked like a mechanical spider the size of a small car, but as it moved into the light, she could see organic components integrated with the metallic framework, its multiple eyes fixed on them with unmistakable intelligence. "Guardian drones," Keeper Voss continued. "The builders created them to protect the refuge from intruders. They have been dormant for centuries, but your presence has activated their protocols." 3 more of the creatures appeared, moving with mechanical precision. Sarah could see weapon ports opening along their chassis, energy beginning to build in what were clearly offensive systems. "Can we communicate with them?" Sarah asked, slowly backing toward a larger chamber while keeping herself between the drones and Starlight. "Unknown, the builder's language is long dead. But Commander, there may be another way. The drones are programmed to protect the refuge from intruders, but they also served as the station's weapon systems. If you could convince them that the approaching hegemony fleet represents a threat to the refuge." Sarah understood immediately. They might activate the station's defenses. "Possibly, but first you must survive the next few minutes." The lead drone had finished its energy buildup and was clearly preparing to fire. Sarah pushed Starlight behind a crystalline formation and drew her sidearm, knowing it would be useless against the creature's armor. Then Starlight did something that surprised everyone. The cub stepped out from behind the crystal, its small hands raised in a gesture that was unmistakably peaceful, and began to sing. It wasn't like any music Sarah had ever heard. The melody seemed to resonate with the cavern itself, making the bioluminescent walls pulse in rhythm. But more than that, the song carried emotions, sadness for the lost, hope for the future, and a deep respect for those who had built this place as a sanctuary. The Guardian drones stopped moving. Their weapon systems powered down, and Sarah could see their optical sensors shifting to focus on Starlight. The cub continued to sing, adding layers of harmony that seemed impossible from a single throat. "Incredible," came Dr. Price's voice over the comm. "Sarah, I'm reading massive neural activity from the cub. It's not just singing, it's projecting telepathically. The drones are responding to its emotional broadcast." One by one, the Guardian drones began to settle down, their mechanical limbs folding beneath them in what was clearly a non-threatening posture. The largest one actually approached Starlight, extending a sensor array that the cub touched with one small paw. Images suddenly flashed through Sarah's mind, not her own memories, but something shared through the telepathic link with Starlight. She saw the refuge as it had been when it was new, bustling with activity, ships coming and going, families living and working in safety. She saw the builders, a species of tall, graceful beings with multiple arms and faces that seemed to be made of living crystal. And she saw the last days, when enemy fleets had surrounded the system and the builders had made their final stand, programming their Guardian drones to protect anyone who came seeking sanctuary. Starlight's song gradually faded, but the connection with the drones remained. Sarah could feel their attention, their willingness to listen. "Starlight," she said quietly, "can you show them the hegemony fleet? Show them what's coming." The cub nodded and touched the lead drone again. Sarah felt the flow of information, images of the destroyed homeworld, the fleeing survivors, the approaching hunters. She added her own knowledge, tactical assessments of the hegemony ships, their weapons, their intentions. The drone's response was immediate. Ancient systems throughout the refuge began powering up, energy flowing through conduits that had been dark for centuries. Deep in the station's core, massive weapons began their charging cycles. "Commander Chen," Rodriguez's voice was tight with excitement. "We're reading massive energy signatures from your location. Whatever you did down there, every sensor on the station is going crazy." Sarah smiled grimly. "We just made some new friends. How long until the hegemony fleet arrives?" 47 minutes. "Then we'd better get ready for a fight." As the refuge awakened around them, Sarah felt Starlight slip its small paw into her hand. The trust in that gesture hit her harder than any weapon could have. These children had lost everything, their world, their families, their future. But they still believed that justice was possible, that someone would stand up for them when it mattered. Sarah squeezed the small paw gently and made a promise, both to the cub beside her and to the memory of her sister Emma. She would not let the innocent fall, not today, not ever. The hegemony was about to learn what happened when humans said enough. The hegemony fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a school of predatory fish, their hulls gleaming with the dull shine of military-grade armor. From the observation deck of mining station Kepler 7, Dr. Amanda Price watched through high-powered telescopes as the 7 cruisers and command carrier arranged themselves in a standard intimidation formation. "They're beautiful," she murmured, then immediately felt sick for thinking it. The ships were beautiful in the same way that a cobra was beautiful, sleek, deadly, perfectly evolved for killing. "Signal coming in," Rodriguez announced from the communications station. "They want to talk." "Put them through," Sarah's voice crackled over the internal comm from her position in the hidden refuge below. "And make sure they know I'm the one in charge here." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of the hegemony command ship. The being that appeared was unlike anything in human databases, tall and angular, with skin that seemed to be made of overlapping metallic plates. Its eyes were compound, like an insect's, and when it spoke, its voice had a mechanical quality that suggested cybernetic enhancement. "I am Fleet Commander Zhek-9 of the Galactic Hegemony 3rd Enforcement Fleet. You will immediately surrender the terrorist fugitives you are harboring, or face the consequences of interfering with lawful hegemony operations." Sarah's image appeared on a secondary screen. She was transmitting from the refuge using the station's communications array. "I'm Commander Sarah Chen, Terran Colonial Authority, and those aren't terrorists you're hunting. They're refugees, children." "Thieves and saboteurs," Zhek-9 corrected, its mechanical voice showing no emotion. "They have stolen hegemony property and destroyed mining equipment worth millions of credits. Standard penalty is immediate recycling." "Recycling?" Dr. Price couldn't help but ask. "Biological matter reclamation for useful purposes," the hegemony commander explained as if discussing the weather. "Nothing is wasted in an efficient society." Sarah's face on the screen had gone very cold. "You're talking about murder." "I am talking about justice. You have 10 minutes to comply, or we will take them by force. Your crude mining facility cannot stand against hegemony military power." The screen went dark. In the silence that followed, Dr. Price could hear her own heartbeat. "Sarah," she said into her communicator, "please tell me you have a plan." "I have a plan," Sarah's voice came back steady and determined. "It's probably insane, but I have a plan." Below in the refuge, Sarah was standing in what had once been the main control center. Ancient displays were coming online around her, showing tactical information in the builder's crystalline script. Starlight sat beside her, the cub's small paws somehow interfaced with the organic control systems. "The station's weapons are almost fully charged," the young alien reported. "But Commander Sarah, these ships are very powerful. The builder's technology is old." "Sometimes old is better," Sarah replied, studying the tactical displays. The Guardian drones had been very thorough in their assessment of the approaching fleet. Starlight, can you ask the drones about the station's stealth capabilities? Something this well hidden must have sophisticated camouflage systems. The cub communicated with the artificial beings in that strange, melodic language that seemed to bypass speech entirely. The Guardian says the station can become invisible to most sensors, but maintaining stealth while firing weapons is difficult. What about the storm wall itself? Can we use that? More musical communication. Starlight's ears perked up with excitement. Yes, the station can manipulate the electromagnetic patterns of the storm. We can create false sensor readings, make the enemy see things that are not there. Sarah smiled grimly. Perfect, here's what we're going to do. 20 minutes later, Commander Zek-9 was beginning to lose patience. The humans had not responded to his ultimatum, and the mining station appeared to be powering down its systems in preparation for evacuation. Long-range sensors confirm multiple shuttle launches from the station, reported his tactical officer. It appears the humans are fleeing. And taking the fugitives with them, no doubt, Zek-9 said. Begin pursuit. I want those shuttles captured before they can reach hyperspace. The hegemony fleet surged forward, their powerful engines eating up the distance to the fleeing shuttles. It was almost too easy. The human vessels were slow, designed for cargo transport rather than speed. The nearest cruiser would intercept them within minutes. That's when everything went wrong. The lead hegemony cruiser Inexorable will Asterisk was just preparing to fire warning shots when its sensors detected something impossible. Another fleet was dropping out of hyperspace directly ahead of the fleeing shuttles. A fleet of massive, unknown ships with technology signatures unlike anything in hegemony databases. Fleet Commander, the tactical officer's voice was tight with concern. I'm reading 12 heavy battleships, unknown configuration. They're powering weapons and moving to intercept. Zek-9 stared at the tactical display. Where had these ships come from? Their design was completely unfamiliar. Organic curves mixed with crystal formations, clearly advanced technology but nothing like current galactic standard designs. Hail them, he ordered. Demand identification. But before communications could be established, the unknown fleet opened fire. Energy beams unlike anything in hegemony experience lashed out across space, striking the nearest cruiser with devastating force. The ship's shields held, but barely, and damage reports began flooding in. Return fire, Zek-9 commanded. All ships engage the unknown hostiles. The battle was joined with fury. Hegemony weapons were efficient and deadly, designed for overwhelming firepower against conventional targets. But these mysterious ships seemed to absorb damage that should have destroyed them, their crystalline hulls somehow converting energy attacks into defensive power. Deep in the hidden refuge, Sarah watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The illusion was perfect. Using the storm wall's electromagnetic properties, the ancient station was projecting false sensor readings that made the hegemony fleet see enemies that didn't exist. Every shot they fired at the phantom ships was actually being absorbed and redirected by the storm's natural energy fields. How long can we maintain this? She asked Starlight. The Guardian says the system will hold as long as the storm continues, the cub replied. But Commander Sarah, the real ships are breaking through the storm wall. They will discover the deception soon. Sarah nodded. She'd expected that. Phase 1 was always just about buying time for Phase 2. On the mining station above, Dr. Price and the rest of the crew were implementing their part of the plan. The evacuating shuttles that the hegemony was chasing were actually automated cargo drones, programmed to fly in formation while broadcasting false life signs. Meanwhile, the real shuttles were hidden in the asteroid field beyond the gas giant, along with Keeper Voss and the surviving cubs. If this plan failed, at least they'd have a chance to escape. But Sarah didn't intend to fail. Starlight, tell the Guardians it's time for Phase 2. The Cubs' song filled the control chamber once again, but this time it carried a different message. Around them, the refuge began to change. Sections of the storm wall that had appeared to be natural cloud formations suddenly shifted, revealing hidden weapon batteries that had been camouflaged for centuries. The hegemony fleet was so focused on fighting the phantom ships that they didn't notice the real danger until it was too late. Beams of coherent energy, far more advanced than anything humanity had ever created, lanced out from concealed positions throughout the storm wall. The shots were perfectly targeted, striking shield generators and weapon systems with surgical precision. The hegemony cruiser Righteous Purpose simply disintegrated under the assault, its hull vaporized in seconds. Two more ships suffered catastrophic damage, their crews barely managing to get to escape pods before the hulls breached. Impossible, Jek9 snarled, his mechanical voice finally showing emotion. Tactical analysis, where are those weapons firing from? Unknown, Fleet Commander. Sensors show the attacks originating from within the storm wall itself, but that's meteorologically impossible. No artificial structure could survive in that environment. But even as his sensor operator spoke, Jek9 was beginning to understand. The storm wall wasn't natural, it was a defensive screen designed to hide something massive, something that had been waiting for centuries for someone to threaten it. All ships retreat to minimum safe distance, he ordered. Prepare orbital bombardment packages. If we cannot capture the fugitives, we will ensure they cannot escape. It was exactly the response Sarah had been counting on. They're falling back to bombardment range, she reported to her crew. Amanda, are the evacuation teams ready? All civilian personnel are aboard the cargo haulers in the asteroid field, Dr. Price confirmed. But Sarah, if you're planning what I think you're planning. The Cubs make it out, Sarah said firmly. Whatever else happens, they survive, that's non-negotiable. She turned to Starlight, who was monitoring the ancient systems with an expertise that seemed impossible for someone so young. Can the station's shields protect the mining platforms during bombardment? For a time, the Cub replied, but not forever. These ships carry planet-killer weapons. Then we'd better make sure they don't get to use them. Sarah activated the final phase of her plan. Throughout the hidden refuge, systems that hadn't been used in 1,000 years came fully online. The storm wall itself began to shift and change as massive gravitational manipulators altered the gas giant's atmospheric patterns. On his command deck, Jek9 watched in growing horror as the very planet below seemed to come alive. The storm systems were moving in ways that defied physics, creating massive funnels of electromagnetic energy that reached up toward his fleet. Fleet Commander, his science officer reported, the atmospheric disturbance is generating a gravitational anomaly if it continues to intensify. We'll be pulled into the atmosphere, Jek9 finished. All ships emergency burn, get us clear of the gravity well. But it was too late. The ancient builders of the refuge had designed it as the ultimate defensive system, capable of weaponizing an entire gas giant's atmospheric dynamics. One by one, the hegemony ships found their engines overwhelmed by forces beyond their ability to resist. The command carrier Final Authority was the first to break apart, its hull crushed by gravitational stress. The remaining cruisers managed to maintain formation, but Sarah could see on her tactical displays that their shield systems were failing. Starlight, she said quietly, open a channel to the hegemony fleet. The young alien complied, and Sarah found herself looking at Commander Jek9's bridge again. The hegemony officer's compound eyes were fixed on her with something that might have been respect if his species was capable of such emotions. You have fought well, human, he said, but this victory will cost you. The hegemony will send more fleets, larger ones. You cannot protect these fugitives forever. Maybe not, Sarah replied, but I can protect them today, and tomorrow when your superiors ask what happened here, you tell them something. What? You tell them that humans don't abandon children, ever, and if they want to test that principle again, they're welcome to try. Jek9 studied her for a long moment. You would risk war with the entire hegemony for 12 alien refugees. In a heartbeat, Sarah said without hesitation. Because that's what it means to be human. We don't calculate the odds when children are in danger, we just act. The hegemony commander was quiet for several seconds. Finally, he spoke again. My superiors will not understand this reasoning. Then maybe they need better superiors. Another pause, then, I will tell them the fugitives were lost in the storm, equipment malfunction. These things happen in hazardous environments. Sarah blinked, surprised. Why would you do that? Because, Jek9 said slowly, I have begun to understand that efficiency is not the same as wisdom. Perhaps there are lessons the hegemony could learn from humans. The channel closed, and Sarah watched as the surviving hegemony ships disengaged from the gravitational trap and began their retreat. It would take them hours to reach safe distance, and by then the refugees would be long gone. "Commander Sarah," Starlight said beside her, "the Guardian drones want to know if you will stay. The refuge has been alone for so long." Sarah looked around the ancient control chamber, at the incredible technology that could have changed humanity's place in the galaxy. Then she looked down at the young alien who had saved them all with nothing but courage and a song. "Tell them we'll visit," she said, "but our place is out there with the people who need protecting." As the storm wall settled back to its normal patterns and the hidden weapons powered down, Sarah began planning for the future. The galaxy was a dangerous place, full of species like the hegemony who valued efficiency over compassion. But today, 12 children were safe, and sometimes that was enough to change everything. 6 months after the battle at Kepler 442c, Sarah stood in the observation lounge of the TCA research vessel Endeavour, watching a planet she'd never seen before slowly rotate beneath them. The world was beautiful: blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in perfect spirals. It looked almost exactly like Earth. "It's perfect," said Starlight, pressing his nose against the transparent aluminum window. The young alien had grown in the months since their first meeting, both physically and emotionally. His fur had deepened from silver to a rich blue-gray, and his telepathic abilities had strengthened to the point where he could communicate with humans almost as easily as with his own kind. "Are you sure your people will be happy here?" Sarah asked. "It's a long way from your original territory." Starlight's ears twitched in the gesture she'd learned meant complicated emotions. "Keeper Voss says it doesn't matter where we rebuild, only that we remember who we were, and now we have something we never had before." "What's that?" "Friends who fight for us." The planet below was designated New Sanctuary, a world in the unclaimed territories between human and hegemony space. The Terran Colonial Authority had been surprisingly supportive when Sarah had presented her proposal to establish a refugee settlement. Of course, the tactical advantages of having an advanced alien civilization as an ally might have influenced their decision. "Commander Chen to the bridge," came the announcement over the ship's comm system. "Priority transmission incoming." Sarah made her way to the bridge, Starlight following close behind. The young alien had become her unofficial shadow over the past months, insisting that humans shouldn't face dangers alone. It was a sentiment that had spread throughout his people. 12 survivors had become the core of a growing movement that saw humanity as the galaxy's unexpected champions of the innocent. "What do we have, Captain Morrison?" Sarah asked as she entered the bridge. Captain Morrison was a career naval officer, old enough to remember when humanity's biggest concern was asteroid pirates rather than galactic politics. He gestured to the main communication screen with a worried expression. "Emergency signal from the Vegan Trade Consortium. They're reporting attacks on civilian transports in the Rigel sector. Unknown ships, highly advanced, targeting refugee convoys specifically." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Show me the tactical data." The screen filled with sensor recordings from the attacked ships. The attackers were using technology similar to hegemony designs, but with modifications that made them even more deadly. Worse, the attack patterns showed a deliberate targeting of life support systems. They weren't trying to capture cargo or territory. They were trying to kill everyone aboard. "How many casualties?" she asked. 3 convoy ships destroyed completely," Morrison replied grimly. 2,000 beings dead, including 800 children from various species. The survivors are requesting assistance, but they're scattered across a dozen systems. Starlight had gone very still beside her, his fur darkening to almost black. Through their telepathic link, Sarah could feel his emotional response: grief, rage, and something else. Recognition. "You know who did this?" she said quietly. The young alien nodded slowly. "Hegemony Purification Fleet. They are not like regular military. They hunt people who try to escape hegemony control. Commander Zeknine was honorable, but these are different." "Different how?" "They believe weakness must be removed from the galaxy. Any species that cannot defend itself deserves extinction. They see kindness as a disease that spreads between stars." Sarah studied the tactical data more carefully. The attack patterns were efficient, brutal, and absolutely without mercy. This wasn't about territory or resources, it was about ideology. "Captain, set course for the Rigel sector," she ordered. "Maximum burn." Morrison frowned. "Commander, I have to point out that we're a research vessel, not a warship. Our mission is to establish the refugee colony, not to engage in combat operations." "Our mission," Sarah said firmly, "is to protect people who can't protect themselves. Everything else is secondary." Over the next 3 days, as the Asterisk Endeavor raced toward the Rigel sector, Sarah found herself preparing for a very different kind of fight. The hegemony purification fleet wasn't like the regular military forces they'd faced at Kepler. These were fanatics, believers in a cause that valued strength above all else. But Sarah had advantages they didn't expect. The refugee crisis had drawn attention throughout the galaxy. Species that had never worked together were now sharing intelligence, resources, and personnel. The Endeavor wasn't traveling alone. It was leading a volunteer fleet of nearly 40 ships from a dozen different civilizations. More importantly, word of humanity's stand against the hegemony had spread. What had started as a single act of defiance was becoming something larger, a coalition of species that refused to accept that might made right. "Incoming transmission," announced Lieutenant Torres from the communications station. "It's from the Andromeden Peace Collective." The main screen flickered to life, revealing a being that looked like it was made of living crystal. The Andromedans were an ancient species, one of the few that the hegemony treated with caution rather than contempt. "Commander Chen," the crystalline being said, its voice like chimes in a gentle wind. "I am High Arbiter Melody of Distant Stars. We have been monitoring the situation in the Rigel sector." "High Arbiter," Sarah replied formally. "We're en route to provide assistance to the refugee survivors." "As are we, but Commander, you should know that this attack is not random. The Purification Fleet has been tracking specific individuals, refugees from worlds the hegemony has processed. They fear these survivors will spread what they call contamination of weakness to other species." Sarah glanced at Starlight, who was listening intently. "What kind of contamination?" "The idea that advanced species have a responsibility to protect those who cannot protect themselves," Melody of Distant Stars replied. "An idea that originated, we believe, from your encounter with young Starlight and his people." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The attacks on refugee convoys weren't random terrorism. They were a direct response to humanity's actions 6 months ago. Every death, every destroyed ship, every murdered child was a consequence of her decision to save 12 alien cubs. "I see the guilt in your stance, Commander," the Andromedan continued gently. "But you must understand this was inevitable. The hegemony has maintained order through fear for millennia. Your species has introduced a new concept into galactic politics, hope. That is far more dangerous to them than any weapon." "Doesn't make the dead any less dead," Sarah said quietly. "No, but it makes their deaths meaningful if we ensure their sacrifice leads to change." After the transmission ended, Sarah found herself standing alone in her quarters, staring out at the stars. Starlight found her there an hour later, the young alien's presence a warm comfort in her mind. "You blame yourself," he said, not a question. "Shouldn't I? If we'd just taken you and your people somewhere quiet, found you a safe world away from everything. Then the Purification Fleet would have continued hunting refugees in secret," Starlight interrupted. "And thousands more would have died without anyone knowing or caring. Commander Sarah, you gave us something more important than safety." "What?" "You gave us purpose." The young alien moved to stand beside her at the window. "My people have a saying, the tree that provides shelter cannot choose which creatures find refuge in its branches. You cannot control how others respond to kindness, only whether you continue to offer it." They reached the Rigel sector 18 hours later, and the scene that greeted them was chaos. Wreckage from destroyed ships drifted in loose clouds around the system's third planet. Survivor pods broadcast weak distress signals from a dozen different locations, and somewhere in the debris field, the Purification Fleet was still hunting. "Sensor contacts," reported the tactical officer. "3 heavy cruisers, hegemony configuration but heavily modified. There. Commander, they're systematically destroying survivor pods." Sarah felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. "Red alert, all ships combat formation, we're going in." The volunteer fleet spread out in a coordinated attack pattern that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Species that had been enemies for generations now flew wing to wing, united by a common cause. Human fighters flew alongside vegan interceptors. Andromedan crystal ships provided long-range fire support, while Rigelian assault vessels prepared for close combat. The Purification fleet noticed their approach and immediately moved to engage. These weren't like the regular hegemony ships they'd faced before. Their hulls were black, absorbing sensor beams, and their weapons fired in patterns designed for maximum psychological impact. Incoming transmission from the lead purification ship, Tors announced. "Put them through," Sarah ordered. The face that appeared on screen was humanoid but clearly artificial. Cybernetic implants had replaced most organic features, leaving only the eyes as evidence of the being it had once been. When it spoke, its voice was utterly without emotion. "I am Executor Prime 7 of the Hegemony Purification Fleet. You are interfering with a sanctified cleansing operation. Withdraw immediately or be processed as contamination vectors." "This is Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Authority," Sarah replied. "The only thing being processed today is your threat to innocent civilians." Prime 7's artificial face showed no expression. "Analyzing, Terran species. Classification recently elevated, threat assessment minimal. Cultural contamination level maximum, recommendation immediate sterilization." "Good luck with that," Sarah said and closed the channel. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The volunteer fleet fought not with the cold efficiency of military doctrine, but with the passion of beings protecting something precious. Ships that should have been destroyed by superior firepower somehow survived through sheer determination and mutual support. The Purification fleet, for all their technological advantages, had never faced opponents who were willing to sacrifice themselves for strangers. Their tactical algorithms couldn't account for the vegan transport captain who deliberately rammed his cargo ship into a hegemony cruiser to save a pod full of refugee children. They couldn't predict the Andromedan battle song that somehow disrupted their targeting computers. And they certainly hadn't expected humans to use tactics that prioritized rescue over victory. "Starlight," Sarah called as the Asterisk Endeavor maneuvered through the battle zone. "Can you coordinate with the other telepathic species? We need to locate all the survivor pods before the purification ships can destroy them." The young alien closed his eyes, his consciousness reaching out through the psychic network that connected several of the volunteer species. "Found them. 14 pods still active, scattered throughout the debris field. But Commander, there's something else." "What?" "One of the pods contains survivors from my original species, cubs who escaped from another destroyed colony ship." Sarah didn't hesitate. Lay in a course, maximum speed. As the Asterisk Endeavor raced toward the coordinates Starlight had provided, Sarah found herself thinking about choice and consequence. Every decision led to other decisions. Every act of kindness rippled outward in ways that couldn't be predicted. 6 months ago, she'd made a simple choice: to save a falling child. Now that choice had led to a galactic conflict between two different visions of civilization. But as they rescued pod after pod of grateful survivors, as she watched former enemies work together to save strangers, Sarah realized something important. She'd make the same choice again, every time. Because that's what it meant to be human, not to calculate the odds or consider the consequences, but to act when someone needed help. And if that made humanity dangerous to the hegemony's vision of order, then so be it. The galaxy needed a little more chaos, a little more hope, a little more humanity. 2 years after the Battle of Rigel, Sarah stood in the council chambers of New Geneva Station, humanity's newest diplomatic outpost. Around the circular table sat representatives from 47 different species, all united by a shared commitment to something that had once seemed impossible. A galaxy where strength was measured not by the ability to destroy, but by the willingness to protect. The Galactic Protection Alliance, as the media had dubbed it, wasn't what anyone had expected. There were no grand declarations of war against the hegemony, no massive fleets preparing for conquest. Instead, it was something much simpler and much more dangerous to the established order, a network of worlds that had decided to care about each other. "The latest reports from the Outer Rim are encouraging," said Ambassador Zara Flight Through Clouds. the Andromedan representative. Her crystalline form sparkled as she gestured to the holographic display. 17 new worlds have joined the Mutual Protection Compact this month alone. And the hegemony response? Asked General Harrison, the grizzled human military advisor who'd been Sarah's strongest supporter in the early days. Increasing desperation, replied Keeper Voss, who now served as the spokesperson for all refugee populations within Alliance space. The years had been kind to the former guardian of Starlight's people. He looked healthier, more confident, carrying himself with the dignity of someone whose life's work had found new purpose. They're pulling regular military units from border patrols to reinforce the purification fleets. Sarah studied the tactical display, noting the patterns of hegemony troop movements. What she saw was encouraging and troubling in equal measure. The enemy was becoming more concentrated, more focused on eliminating what they saw as the Alliance's ideological contamination. But that also meant they were becoming more dangerous to civilian populations. "Starlight," she said, addressing the young alien who sat beside her. He'd grown considerably in the past 2 years, now standing nearly as tall as an adult human, his fur a magnificent deep blue that seemed to shift and flow with his emotions. "What are your people's scouts reporting from the neutral zones?" "The same story we hear everywhere," Starlight replied, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who'd become a symbol of hope across dozens of worlds. "Planets choosing protection over profit, species that haven't spoken in centuries working together to evacuate refugee populations." It was true. The Alliance's greatest weapon wasn't military technology or diplomatic pressure. It was the simple proof that alternatives existed. Every successful rescue mission, every thriving refugee settlement, every former enemy species working in partnership served as evidence that the hegemony's vision of inevitable conflict wasn't the only way. "There's something else," Starlight continued, his ears drooping slightly. "Intelligence suggests the hegemony is planning something called the Final Sterilization Protocol. Our contacts in their government won't say what it entails, but the psychic resonance from their decision-makers suggests something. Final." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. In 2 years of conflict, the hegemony had never used weapons of mass destruction. Their ideology required personal conquest, the demonstration of superior strength. If they were considering planetary-scale weapons, it meant they were more desperate than anyone had realized. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Unknown, but Executor Prime 7's fleet has been reinforced with ships we've never seen before. Dark hulls, no identification codes, crews that register as psychically dead." The room fell silent. Everyone present had encountered the purification fleets, and the memory of those emotionless, cybernetically enhanced crews still haunted their nightmares. The idea that there might be something even worse was deeply unsettling. "Recommendations?" Sarah asked the group. General Harrison leaned forward. "We accelerate the evacuation protocols. Get as many civilian populations as possible into protected space before whatever this is comes online." "That could take years," protested Ambassador Melody of Distant Stars. "And it assumes we can identify all the target worlds in advance." "What if we don't run?" said a new voice from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned to see Dr. Amanda Price, who'd been working with Alliance xenobiologists to understand hegemony psychology. "What if instead of evacuating populations, we make it impossible for the hegemony to target them?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "The hegemony's entire ideology is based on the concept of superior species dominating inferior ones," Amanda said, moving to the central display. "They can justify exterminating refugees because they classify them as weak, contaminated, unworthy of existence. But what if that classification became problematic?" She activated a new hologram, showing genetic and cultural analysis charts. "Every species we've brought into the Alliance has been classified by the hegemony as inferior in some way. Too peaceful, too individualistic, too willing to cooperate rather than compete. But look what happens when these inferior traits are combined." The display showed tactical analyses from recent battles. Human innovation combined with Andromedan computational power. Vegan emotional intuition merged with Rigelian strategic thinking. Individually weak species that together had consistently outperformed hegemony predictions. "You're suggesting we actively spread the contamination," Keeper Voss said slowly, understanding dawning in his voice. I'm suggesting we prove that their entire worldview is wrong, Amanda replied. Not through military conquest, but through simple demonstration. Make cooperation so obviously superior to domination that even their own people start asking questions. It was a beautiful idea, and also terrifying in its implications. To succeed, they would have to not just defend refugee populations, but actively transform the political structure of an entire galaxy. The hegemony won't sit still while we undermine their authority, General Harrison pointed out. This could trigger the very escalation we're trying to prevent. Maybe, Sarah said quietly, or maybe it gives us a chance to end this without anyone else dying. She stood up, decision crystallizing in her mind. We do both. General, I want evacuation protocols ready for any world that wants them. But Amanda, I also want you to work with our diplomatic corps on expansion initiatives. Every species that joins the alliance makes us stronger and makes the hegemony's position more untenable. And if they launch this final sterilization protocol before we're ready? Asked Ambassador Zara Flight Through Clouds. Sarah looked around the room at the representatives of dozens of worlds, each one a testament to the idea that diversity was strength rather than weakness. Then we show them what happens when you threaten children in front of their human guardians. The next 6 months were a blur of activity. Alliance ships spread out across the galaxy, offering protection, resources, and most importantly, proof that cooperation worked. Worlds that had been isolated for centuries suddenly found themselves part of a community that valued their unique contributions. But the hegemony wasn't idle either. Reports came in of massive construction projects in the galactic core, of fleets being recalled from frontier zones, of entire systems being evacuated of hegemony civilian populations. The intelligence breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a hegemony military officer who contacted the Alliance through encrypted channels. Commander Jek-9, the same officer Sarah had faced at Kepler, had been demoted after his failure to eliminate the original refugees. But his new position gave him access to information that made his mechanical blood run cold. The final sterilization protocol isn't a weapon, he explained during a secret meeting in neutral space. It's a philosophical shift. The hegemony leadership has decided that coexistence with what they call contaminated species is impossible. They plan to systematically exterminate not just refugee populations, but any species that has shown Alliance sympathies. Sarah felt sick. How many worlds? Current target list includes 3,000 inhabited systems, Jek-9 replied. To be completed over a 5-year period using automated genocide fleets. No negotiations, no surrender options, complete biological sterilization. Why are you telling us this? Starlight asked. Over the years, he'd developed a healthy skepticism about former enemies bearing information. The cybernetic commander was quiet for a long moment. Because I have begun to understand that efficiency and morality are not the same thing. Your species taught me that, and because... He paused, as if the words were difficult to say, because I have children now. Adopted refugees from a world the purification fleet processed last year. I cannot protect them from what is coming, but perhaps you can. The revelation changed everything. This wasn't about military conquest or political control, it was about survival on a galactic scale. We need to move faster than anyone thought possible, Sarah announced to the emergency council session. Full mobilization, every ship, every world, every resource we can muster. To do what? General Harrison asked. Even if we evacuate every threatened world, where do we put 3,000 populations? We don't evacuate them, Sarah replied. We make them impossible to target. The plan that emerged was audacious, beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of trying to hide threatened populations, the Alliance would do the opposite. Integrate them so completely into a web of mutual interdependence that attacking any one world would require attacking them all. They called it the Sanctuary Network. Emergency, faster-than-light transportation systems linking every Alliance world. Shared defense grids that made isolated attacks impossible. Most importantly, mixed populations on every planet, making it impossible to target specific species without committing genocide against Alliance allies. The hegemony's response was swift and brutal. Purification fleets struck at Alliance outposts, trying to break the growing network before it could reach critical mass. But for every facility they destroyed, 3 more came online. For every Alliance ship they eliminated, 5 more appeared, crewed by volunteers from species that had never before cooperated on anything. The final confrontation came not as a massive space battle, but as something much more personal. Sarah was on New Sanctuary, overseeing the evacuation of a hegemony border world whose population had voted to join the Alliance, when the Purification Fleet arrived. 50 ships against the small defensive force protecting the refugee transports. It should have been a massacre. Instead, as Executor Prime 7 prepared to give the order to fire, something unprecedented happened. "Executor Prime 7, came a transmission from one of his own ships. "This is Sub-Commander Zek 9. I am relieving you of command under Hegemony Military Code Omega 7, refusal to follow lawful orders that violate basic species survival protocols." "You have no authority here," Prime 7 responded, his artificial voice showing the first hints of uncertainty. "I have the authority of every hegemony officer who has watched civilian transports fleeing from our guns," Zek 9 replied. "I have the authority of parents who want their children to inherit a galaxy worth living in. I have the authority of conscience." One by one, hegemony ships began switching sides. Not all of them, Prime 7's most fanatical followers, held firm, but enough to change the balance, to show that even within the hegemony, there were those who had grown tired of being the galaxy's executioners. The brief battle that followed was more symbol than substance. Prime 7's remaining ships fought with desperate fury, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting against opponents who had something they'd forgotten how to value: hope. When the Purification Fleet's flagship finally surrendered, Sarah found herself face to face with Prime 7 himself. The cybernetic creature was a patchwork of organic and artificial components, more machine than being, his original species long since obscured by technological modifications. "This changes nothing," he said, his voice still devoid of emotion. "The hegemony will not tolerate contamination. They will build new fleets, recruit new commanders." "Maybe," Sarah replied, "but they'll have to do it without their best officers, and every day that passes, more species choose cooperation over conquest. Eventually, you'll run out of people willing to fight for a system that values strength over compassion." Prime 7 stared at her with optical sensors that held no warmth, no understanding. "Compassion is weakness. The strong survive, the weak perish. This is natural law." "No," said Starlight, stepping up beside Sarah. The young alien had grown into a powerful advocate for his people, but his eyes still held the memory of falling through storm clouds while a human stranger risked everything to save him. "This is choice, and we choose differently." As the last of the hegemony holdouts were taken into custody, Sarah received a priority transmission from the Alliance Council. The news was better than anyone had dared hope. The hegemony's central government was in collapse. Faced with massive defections from their own military and the complete failure of the Purification Fleet strategy, the ruling council had voted to enter negotiations with the Alliance. It wouldn't be quick, and it wouldn't be easy. Centuries of authoritarian control don't disappear overnight. There would be holdout systems, rogue fleets, and probably years of small conflicts as the galaxy,